Margaret, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to this.
I'm so excited. This is our first time meeting. So, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe about that journey from dancing to writing.
I've danced all my life. I started dancing probably about from the time that I could walk, and it got to such a point that I was moving around the house so much. My parents went ahead and just put me in dance class. I used to, when I was a child, I used to stand on my head in the living room until I passed out. It was gymnastics and dance, and so I think it was something to contain a hyperactive child that was really physical and a lot of things that I did. But it was more, I remember as a child being more of this artistic expression. So, I spent a lot of time in dance, danced professionally through college, owned the studio you talked about. And after I tutored my kids through school, I'd always wanted to write. I started writing in my 30s. I'm a little bit older than that now. I started writing in my 30s, and it just, I trashed it all. I just didn't think it was right. It wasn't, I wasn't ready. It wasn't ready. But it's something I've always wanted to do. I just didn't feel that I had the confidence, and I had I just don't think I was mature enough or in a right place in order to write, some things that I wanted to say, because it's a very personal thing, writing.
Yeah.
When I finished tutoring the kids through college, they're 26 now. We were starting to come out of the pandemic, and I just kind of decided, and I think a lot of people, when they came out of the pandemic, were like, this is it. This is the time I'm going to do something. I'm going to, this is my chance. It's the chance to start over. We get this new stamp on life, or this new start. And I just sat down and said, that's it. I'm going to do it. And I probably took about 4 months of workshops before I actually started writing a word. I had a lot of thoughts in my mind. I had a lot of ideas. I had a lot of places I wanted to go. I was very well read. Romance, historical romance, paranormal romance. These are all things I've read since junior high school, where I used to sneak my sister and my mom's romance books. The old Fabio covers, that had Fabio on them, those old timey covers that are just, nostalgic to look at now, because they don't make covers like that anymore. They're almost, there were photos that were painted, and painted over to make them look better and more fantastic. But I well read and knew what I wanted to write, knew how I wanted to write and how it wanted to sound and how I wanted the stories to come about, but to have the craftsmanship and the technical ability to do so, I really had to work on that. So I spent a few months, delving into that and taking some workshops, and then I started writing. And, after I finished the first book, you realize, ooh, I need to learn how to write. You have someone look at it, you always want to have someone look at it, because you don't want to just want to write and go, that's it, I'm done. That's not it.
You're not done.
You're not done. You've just begun. And, so, I wrote a first book, and I had to learn how to write. And it took 3 or 4 years, till I got that book to the right place. But, the best part of that is that I kept writing. And it's I like to say this, it's an art to create stories and to tell stories. It's a craft to write them. Ooh. And it's like dancing. Dancing in itself is a art form that has to be studied. And it is a continual study. It doesn't stop. You just don't reach to, you suddenly don't become a professional, as a professional dancer at 19, 20. I certainly did not stop learning there. And you continue to study, you continue working on your craft. Same with acting. It's a craft you must work on, and you must continue to do, and writing is the same. So even to this day, I go through an edit of another book and yet another book, and each edit isn't something else that I learn about my writing. So I guess, it is a journey from dancing to writing. I had an interview say, I did an interview and they said from stage to page, and I kind of snickered, because most people go from page, from the other way, and I'm like, I kind of went backwards, but it's kind of my life. I kind of do everything, the hard way. But no, it's writing is a craft that has to be studied. And that's how it's very similar to dance. And so I've approached the approach of the discipline of writing. I've approached it that way.
Oh yeah, and it's so funny because you do think, how hard could it be to string some words together, and you know where to put the period and maybe a comma here or there, but oh my goodness, like there is something it is an art form. And
Hmm.
I do love that creativity is natural, but it's something that I didn't realize I had to work at so hard when I started writing. Because we do think, oh, she's just naturally creative. Oh, I can't believe she can tell those stories, whatever. And I'm going, yeah, you don't understand the tears I've cried over this. This is not, I didn't just, start typing and go, once upon a time. That's not how that works.
That's such a cliche. Once upon a time.
Once upon a time.
Yeah, no, my books don't start that way. My books
Mine
start
don't either.
quite differently. But yeah, no, I mentored under a New York Times bestselling author, and she was actually an erotica writer, and I went to her and mentored her for my spicy scenes. But she one of the first things she said after reading some of my work, because she would take it like 3,000 words at a time and do some edits on it for me, as she was teaching the class and I was mentoring with her. But one of her first feedbacks to me was, you have part of a gift that cannot be taught,
Mm-hmm.
which is telling great stories.
Mm-hmm.
You understand how to tell great stories, but we've got to get your writing in. She's like, that writing, it's like, we have got to get that writing in place.
Yes.
But, but the flow of the story and where each incident goes and why, and how you build something up. I've got from book 1 to book 2, I won't spoil it, but, because book 2 came out on June 12th. And so I have a setup in book 1 that actually has a reveal in book 2. And so it spans across from one character, because it becomes a main character in book 2, but it actually, and I planned it that way.
Yeah.
I set it up, I was like, ooh, I'm going to set it up over here and then come over here and reveal it. I'm going to wait, and it is a big reveal in book 2. And so that's a very exciting part of it is making the setup. I've always said the sweetest spot of my storytelling and writing is, as a writer, you work very hard to tell your story. You work very hard to have a message or what you want to say or what you want to convey, but how you make readers feel is very important. What I like in my writing, and like one of my biggest goals and what I find the sweet spot of telling a story, is when I write a story and there's portions of it that I want the reader to see this, or I want the reader to feel that, or I want them to walk away with this idea or this feeling. And then I find out that they do, and that I've achieved that goal in my storytelling. That's the sweet spot.
Yes.
That's the best place. Because then I wrote it well. I wrote it well enough where people could understand it. They could relate to it, and it's moved and touched them. And that's the sweet spot.
That is the goal. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So, oh man. Those are the best messages, or, the best emails that I get sometimes. It's like, I didn't set out looking for that praise, but when I get it, I'm like, whoo, like I've done what I set out to do. I didn't
Right.
want you to tell me, because I'm always a little nervous about that, which we'll talk about feedback in a minute, because that's one of those things that every author deals with differently. But I do want to ask, so that first book that you wrote that needed all the help and all the love, did you publish it? Did you end up publishing that first book, or did you hold on to that one as like your first baby project, and then you moved into your actual series that you wrote?
No, that's a very good question, because I did publish it. I'll answer that right away. But I'm going to talk a little bit about it, because it was a journey. And it's Stone of Love. It's the first book in the Stones of Iona series. It features Lord Colin and Brielle, and it talks about their love story. It starts in modern day. It does time travel into the 18th century. And, the best way to state it is, Colin travels back in time in his duty in order to recover some lost fairy stones that are magic stones that come from the Isle of Iona. The book takes place in Scotland. So Colin travels back in time for the fae as his duty to locate missing magic stones that control the realms. Brielle literally trips back in time. So, so it's, and it's, and that's, that's a great tease to talk about the book. But, writing the book, that is the first book I wrote. That is that book that I labored over, that I wrote, that, I was like, it's done, and then you have someone read it. It's like, it's not, it's like, yeah, I just didn't get that. And you're like, yeah, I know. And you're like, well, okay, but Yeah, it was a labor of love. And,
Mhm.
I had editors, I had book coach, I had teachers. Um, I had people said, you know what, that first book, everyone, let's just put it away. You learned how to write, and that's fine. And I already knew when I wrote it that it was the beginning of a series. I already knew it was a series. I knew when I sat down and wanted to start writing, because I had waited so long to start to write. I had so many ideas that I had already developed this entire series and this story and this development across multiple characters, that I wanted this, herd of a cast of characters who were going to talk about the lives of all these people that knew each other, and this journey for the Fae and these magic stones. And I just kept telling them, I can't let this story go. This is, if I let this story go, the whole series is gone.
Yeah.
And when I first wrote it, it was going to be a trilogy. And, since there's 7 stones, there's 3 good and 3 evil, and 3 evil hunt the 3 good, because originally the 3 good were cast into space and time by the king of the good Fae in order to protect them from the evil Fae. So there's, evil Fae and there's good Fae, and it's a fight for the control of the realms. And here are these humans that are in charge of guarding it. And the stones themselves are powered by human will and emotion. And so it's the humans that power the stones. And it's, that makes for a great story. And
Yeah.
I couldn't let that go. That whole concept, I just couldn't let go. So I spent 3.5 years working on this book. And, it's got to make it better, And then I wrote a first book, while I was pitching it and trying to find an agent and a publisher. A book coach suggested, maybe you should write another book so you could have 2 projects to pitch, and you're not hung on this one series that may not sell and may not work. So I had written a backstory to why the stones had come to the humans. And that very day that I came up with the idea, I wrote it. I wrote about these shape-shifting dragons and their evil Fae father, and how he's the one that wants the stones. And so these shape-shifting dragon, these men betrayed their evil father in order to serve good. And I walked away from writing it that day. I was walking through the garage and I stopped. It just, those ideas just kind of go, wham, they just hit you. And I stopped in the middle of my garage and went, I have another series. I was like, oh,
Best
I
feeling
went running.
ever.
Yeah, I went running to my husband. Was like, guess what? So he's like, I know, honey, you love your dragons. And I'm like, they are great. So I wrote the first book of the dragons. I wrote Damien's book, and The Devil of Tantala, which is a castle in Scotland. And he's Scottish and he's immortal, and they're based in Scotland. And he has a dragon inside of him, and he shapeshifts. And so I wrote his love story. After writing that, I noticed that my writing had taken the significant improvement through that book. And I was like, great, wow. But I had to go back. I had to go back to this first book and fix it. And it was, the only way I could describe it is headache inducing edits, because I had to take, and that's why I think that's why people who were really familiar with writing and editing said, maybe you should put it away, because it's extraordinarily difficult to go back and re-edit, especially your own work.
Yeah.
To bring it to the level of writing that you're at, because every sentence had to be reworked. Everything had, and it's not just a comma. It's not a comma splice. It's not a squinting modifier. It's not, this is, every sentence had to be reworded and reworked, even though it said the same thing.
Right.
It had to be written in a different way. And I called it headache inducing, and so I ended up publishing that first one. By that time, I'd written the second book in the Stones of Iona series. It also needed headache-inducing edits. I had written the third book in the Stones of Iona series, which also had headache-inducing edits. And then I'd done the summary outline for the fourth book. Now, the end of the reason I tell you all this, the end of this is that, book 1, The Stone of Love, came out in March 4th. Stone of Fear came out June 12th. Stone of Lust will come out, which is the third book, will come out on October 21st. And then the first Christmas companion book, which I wrote after submitting the first book. They were looking for some Christmas books last fall. And so I was like, I've always wanted, in the first book, Colin, the main male character, goes back and assumes the identity of an identical ancestor. And so that's why he's considered perfect for the mission, is because they look alike. and he can easily assume his identity. So I always wanted the first Christmas book to be the couple in the past and about their courtship. So that's Roderick and Mary, and it all occurs in the past. And there's a little bit of paranormal, but not as much as the other books. And so the Christmas book will come out November 4th. And just yesterday, I signed the contract for book 4, which is Stone of Hope. Yay! Yes, yes. And so that was the one that was the summary. And so I ended up, having to completely redo the summary and but I did end up writing the book within the last year. So I feel very fortunate. But yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting because the first book only came out March 4th. We're sitting in June. And I've been working with my current publisher for over a year now. So it's been a ride. It's been great. It's suddenly taken off, and I remember after writing the first book and I wrote the second book, I was sitting down to lunch with my husband, and he asked me, this was, after the first year of writing, and I wrote for 3.5, 4 years before I got a publisher. So after the first year of writing, we were sitting down for lunch, and he's like, so what are you going to do when you're famous? And I just kind of looked at him and went, famous? I'm just writing,
right?
I'm
just an author.
No, well, when you're published and when you do these interviews, and I'm like, so it's nice because I'm sitting in an interview, but it was so funny because at the time it was like, I don't know, and so occasionally, and he still does this to this day. Occasionally he'll ask these offhanded questions that'll catch me out of the blue that have to do with my writing. And my favorite recent one was, so if your book was made into a movie or a TV show, would you want to be the flop and be like the cultural success, like like the one that becomes the kind of like I'm drawing a blank, but it was a flop in the movie theaters, but 10 years from now everyone loves it.
It's a cult classic. Yeah,
that's it. Thank you. Cult classic. So do you want to be a superstar success movie TV show, or do you want to be the failure but yet the cult classic? So I didn't have to think about it. I was like, I have to be the cult classic because the cult classic is the one that lasts. Yes. That's the one that resonates, that it may have failed at the box office, but it resonates across generations. And I like that, and so but he always has those funny questions of, what is, tell me about, and so it's fun. He keeps it fun.
Mine is that way too. He's always the one that I'm like, why were you thinking about this? Like, what triggered in your mind to ask me that question? But there's never really an answer. He's like, I don't know. It just popped into my head. But I love having that supportive husband, because I tell you what, I don't think I could do it without him cheering me on or just saying, you know what? I think that's a great idea. And just agreeing with me when I say, I've got another idea for a book. He's like, I know you do. You always do.
You always do. I've had that. So I have to ask, okay, it's before the flipping script, but I have to ask. So do you, when you talk about, my husband and I have argued plot points. He's also very well read. He's a musician. So we're kind of both artsy fartsy people. But we talk about plot points. I know that we spent a month and a half arguing over the fact that a picture moves in the first book, and how there's a portrait of Colin that is it looks like Colin, but it's really his ancestor Roderick, and it moves. So when Brielle, she's walking through this castle, this castle in Scotland. It's Colin's castle. And she's there to remodel the chapel, the old chapel. And actually, I used Dunstaffnage Castle outside of Oban in Scotland, which exists. And the chapel in the woods is really there. It is a ruin that's there. But in the book, she's there to remodel the chapel. The castle's not a ruin. So she's walking through this hallway, and there's generation after generation after generation of portraits. And so it's like she goes back in time. As she walks down this hall, it's going back in time, because each of the portraits each ancestor goes back in time. She gets to the end, and there's an 18th century portrait of a Scottish guy in a kilt outside the castle, and it's a painting, and it moves for her. And so we spent 2 months arguing over why it moves, how it moves, what's your theory behind it, is it paranormal, is it not paranormal, is it, and I can't say it'll spoil part of the book if I tell you why. But it moves. And so I'm curious, does your husband argue plot points with you?
So my current series, the next book comes out in October, and he read it a few months ago, and he was like, oh, okay, so this technology that they're using, because the couple, they meet online, right?
Mhm.
But they meet, it's like early 2000s. Okay. Well, my husband is a tech guy. He's like cybersecurity, that's his job kind of thing. And so he was like, does this technology line up with the timeline that you're going after? Like, would they actually have, like, in their dorm room, would they have a T1 connection? I said, there's no T, like, it does not say T1 connection. He's like, yeah, but that's, I mean, if his computer was just connected to the internet, that's what it would have had to have been. And I was like, I don't know. I based it off the fact that I had a T1 connection when I was in my college dorm room. So yeah, like, it's legit. I did my research. He's like, are you sure they would have had this conversation this way? And I'm like, babe, we had those conversations that way when we were their age, you know? So like, yes, I'm basing this on reality.
That's so funny. I know that I aged myself saying this, but I went to a performing and visual arts high school. So I went to an arts magnet school here in
Nice.
Houston, and it's Kinder High School for Performing and Visual Arts. It still exists today.
Nice.
It was so much fun.
Yeah.
I went to school from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. because you get your arts
Mm-hmm.
area is extra time on top of your academics for your high school diploma. And I got two diplomas. I got one from Houston Independent School District and one from PVA. But we call it PVA for short. But I'm going to date myself. My junior and senior year in high school in 1984 and 1985, we had Apple IIe's
Oh yeah.
in the 80s.
Yeah.
And it was a big thing. Pong was a big thing then. That was the technology. Yeah, and it was a big thing to have, to make the computer screen snow, and it was little dots,
Oh
falling down. But it was a random, and we did everything in DOS. We did all the
yeah.
programming in
Mm-hmm.
DOS, and it was a simple equation to get random dots to fall on the screen to make it look like snow. And it was, just so your husband knows, in 1985. We had computers. And now I will admit that it was the first high school in Houston, which is a huge city. It was the first high school in Houston to have computers.
Oh yeah.
And so it was a big thing that we were running computer programming, because I took a computer programming
I
class.
love that.
Did that
Oh
not just
yeah.
date me?
Well, but we, like, my dad always had a computer. I mean, I remember I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and it was black screen, green letters. You had the giant floppy disks. We played Wheel of Fortune. You'd have to swap the disks out halfway through the game, and we've always had technology in our house. And so I am very well versed in how technology evolved over time. And so, like, it was just a natural thing for me. Of course, I made sure I was like, if would this be the cell phone they used, or whatever. But oh yeah, like, there was definitely technology because it was in my house because my dad is a
Mm.
nerd.
Yeah, my husband works in data. He's a data manager,
So
in,
yeah,
in a huge oil and gas company, and he manages millions of points of data. So yeah, he's a tech geek too.
he
But
does the tech too. See,
he
yes,
does
and
tech
so
too.
he'd call you
Yeah.
out on it. Be careful.
Well, like I said, we argued over the paranormal. He's a big paranormal reader, and he loves the shows. And we argued over the paranormal activity of this photograph, this painting moving. And it was all this why and how, and there is a why and how. It's hinted at in the books. I just, that's one of those aspects you don't just come over and go, this is how it works. It's just
Right.
kind of hinted. Yeah. Cause you don't want to, you don't want to spell it all out for the reader. You want to leave a little bit imagining and how that happens and why it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah. It was like a 2 month long argument. And I'm not kidding. I remember one time we sat there for 3 hours going back. Well, I think it's this. Well, I don't think it's.
It's my story, so I love you. Thank you.
Yeah, I love you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I'll put it this way. He hasn't read book 3 and 4. Okay. He
At
knows
some
what
point.
he knows what they are, but he hasn't read them.
That's hilarious. No, I love it though. I love a good supportive husband or partner, or just having that network of people that you can lean back on and be like, okay, I need your opinion. But at the same time, they're not going to take offense if you don't accept their opinion as gospel
Right.
truth, because that's huge. That's very important, that feedback. And I guess while we're moving in that direction, let's talk about feedback because, yeah, that's hard sometimes. I haven't been in the game as long as some other authors have been. My first book, I wrote it in 2021 and published in 2022. Since then, I've written. Oh my gosh, I have written My books are good, I promise. I have an editor. I just got so ahead of myself when I was talking. Let me try that again. I've written several books since then, and they're just, making their way out. But feedback is one of those things that I actively seek out, but also dread at the same time. What's that like for you?
Well, I have a real interesting take on it. And I a lot of that comes from the dancing background, the culture and etiquette of dancing and studying dance is I think different than most any other art form. I think drama comes very close to it, theater and drama, especially if you get into, studying Shakespeare, there's a bit of etiquette in class and how you approach and how you do things and your teacher and specifically feedback, in dance, you don't really question feedback. It's given and you adjust immediately. It's, and whether it's the nice teacher that I've had, I've had thousands of teachers, whether it's the nice one that sits there and goes, okay, today I want to make a tondu, and then there's my, the harshest one I ever had was the Russian one who ran around banging a stick on the floor. Val, it took me weeks to first understand her English because her Russian accent was so heavy. She was the one that told me that my, because I have a gymnast body, and I always have had a very short, stocky sort of body, and it's not exactly conducive for ballet, especially ballet in the 80s where balancing was a big thing and everyone was skinny, light, and lithe, and no one had a chest, and no one had, And so she was the one that told me one day that my body was wrong. I was in the wrong place in the wrong, this was in high school, and I was at the performing arts high school. And, I thought this was my career and my life. And, I have the wrong body type. I'm in the wrong place. Just go be a secretary somewhere. Just go be a secretary, And I went home and cried. I was in high school. I went home and cried. But, I've grown a tougher skin since then. And what I've learned over the years is in every bit of feedback, whether it's constructive criticism, whether it's not, whether it's hurtful in some way, whether their goal is to be a frenemy, there are those out there. And, the feedback is a gift. There's a gift in every piece of feedback. There is something in there that is there to help you. She was telling me that, at the time, that ballet teacher at the time was telling me, you're heavy set. You're not the type of body that people look for right now. This was long and before the time that we see now in dance, where all different body types are welcome and celebrated. But she was telling me that, this just isn't the right performing ballet, maybe isn't the right place for you. I was more of a modern jazz body type, but I loved the ballet. I love the classic stories of ballet. So and every feedback is a gift. And you have to find the gift. Sometimes the gift is there. It's a helpful teacher or a helpful mentor, a helpful editor that says, I know you're really working hard on this, but let's focus on this other part over here because you're struggling with this. And let's, those are the great ones, because those are the ones that are heartfelt, that are warm, that you feel real good about that feedback. The other ones that are real nasty, I'll tell a true story. I submitted that first book, Stone of Love, to a very, very small publishing house. They answered a pitching contest on Twitter. And so I went ahead and submitted. I submitted the whole manuscript, not a partial. I got 4.5 pages of notes back, which is rare. That is a never thing, the best you can get from anyone is, it's not for me. Yeah. I can't tell you how many agents or publishing houses, it's just not for me. It's like, well, that doesn't help me.
Right.
It's like, I get it's a no, but that doesn't help me, and, at least, the feedback of, I can't feel your character's agency. At least I get that, agency is the decision, that their ownership of their decision and actions. But, I can get that, but that it's not for me, but no, this one place gave me 4.5 pages of notes. But once I started reading through it, there was, if it was a paragraph and there were 5 sentences in the paragraph, 3 of those sentences were degrading. I just can't stand this author. Why does she keep going on about that? And there were cuss words in it. It was,
oh my gosh,
this countryside, or, that's just so stupid. I'm so tired of reading this author. I can't, why can't she understand this? And why, and there were some very, very, I wouldn't call them personal jabs, but they were jabs that did not, derive, they didn't respond to my writing. And these were editors responding. And apparently I was told a group of editors had read it, and that these, that this was a collective response from 2 or 3 people. And so I got drunk for a weekend and cried.
Yeah.
And then I looked back over, once I got over it, I looked back over that 4.5 pages, and in there somewhere, and I just said to myself, there's feedback in there. I have to go find it. So every derogatory statement I took out. I took a document and deleted out every derogatory statement. By the time I was done, I had 1.5 pages of feedback. So, in every comment, every review, everyone, there's something in there that is trying to help you. You have to filter and you have to find it. And so that's why I say feedback is a gift, because that if someone says, it might be a poor example, but I'll try. The book that just released, Marie. If I were to say Marie she's a specialist in spiritual buildings, and she came in order to help Brielle work on the chapel. And so she's doing the mosaic floor. And she's a wonderful person, nice blonde hair, short. Okay. Now, someone may read that and go, oh, that's nice, but I can't picture her. I can't picture what she looks like. You said she's short. You said she's blonde. Okay, I get that she remodels floors and she's into spiritual buildings, But if I said that there's a buxom blonde woman skipping down the trail as her ponytail bounces behind her head, and she alights into the area with a smile on her face. Now that would give you, you're like, okay, I can picture, you can picture this woman skipping, so it's from the baseline of the from the baseline of feedback, it's, I'm talking about a woman, her name is this, and this is what she is, but you can't picture it. So if a reader comes back and says, I'm having a really hard time picturing a person, then I go back and say, then I didn't write her right. Somewhere in there, I didn't write enough to give you the picture. So see, in each feedback, there's a gift. You just have to find it.
I like that. And, I don't necessarily go seeking out just anybody's feedback. I'm kind of particular about who's I allowed to come through my filters, because there are those people who they are just going to be, your book was probably not meant for them in the first place, but they picked it up for whatever reason and read it and thought, I should just demolish this with my thoughts and my opinions. And so they just rip it to shreds. And so thankfully I haven't had that happen before. But I do know that people will voice their opinion freely, even if they probably shouldn't.
Yeah, no, I read my reviews. I'm going to be honest. I read my reviews. There's a 1-star out there, and it's interesting. I was, before the first book came out, I was at a conference in Chicago, and there were a number of book writers there. There were some from Wild Rose Press, my publisher, because they were a sponsor and they were there. And I did get to meet my editor-in-chief in person, which was really nice. Because she's the one that, I submitted the initial manuscript to, who then she passed it on to an editor and her employee. But, I talked to a lot of authors, and there was an author, we were in a session, and there was an author going on and on and on. And he had written a book. He was a police officer, but he had written a fiction book that was kind of sort of based on true events. And someone had written a 1-star review because he had mentioned the guy's name without his permission in the book. And he goes, yeah, I know, stupid, But he was all obsessed over this 1-star review. And I turned to him and I said, my book's not even out yet. I got 2 weeks until my book comes out. This was, at the end of February. I got 2 weeks until my book comes out. I've been fortunate enough that my ARC reviews, the things that I've had coming in, they're 4- and 5-star reviews. And I feel extraordinarily fortunate. It's my first book. I've worked really hard on it, 4 years to write it. But I know that 1-star review is out there. I feel it, and at the time I didn't have it. But since then, that 1-star reviews come in, and it was these, and these people are acting immature, and it's, she needs to write kids' books, but the sex scenes were great.
Find the positive.
Right. That's the punchline. That's the punchline to the review is, she should be writing children's books, but the sex scenes were great. Because I write in high heat. And it was, I just, and that's, feedback is a gift. Hey, the sex, the sex scenes, but, you have to find the funny parts of this. There's always in every, and I have other reviews that they're like, I don't normally read time travel, but, and you're like, well, okay, I'm glad that my book is the first one you picked up, but, but yeah, you laugh, you got to laugh at life. You have to. But yeah, feedback is a gift, and there's a silver lining everywhere. And if the sex scenes are great as it, then that's it.
Maybe don't put those in the children's book. My goodness, that was such that's such disparity. Like, what is happening? Like, I don't like that they're okay. People just boggle my mind. And then, I had somebody leave. They didn't leave a review. They just left 2 stars and walked away. And I was like, why? Like, nobody else thought that. Why? Just give me your opinion. I need to know. And then I was like, maybe I don't need to know, but because the 2 stars alone really messed with my head. So
yeah, but that's like the 500 agents going, it's just not for me.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I was like, you know what? But I don't go looking for my reviews. But if I just so happen on Goodreads, I might flip over there and look at them. And, I'm just like, but it's only on good mental health days.
Yes. You have to be in the right state of mental health to be able to read. Yes, that is true. I'm fortunate, Yeah, like I said, I'm averaging around about 4.55 stars on the books. And so, I'm doing good.
I'm feeling good about it. I'm grateful. But, and that's something that, if people are listening that are just readers and not necessarily authors, we need your stars and reviews, even if they're not good. It brings attention to our work and other people will find it. So, if you're a reader, leave reviews or at least stars. We need you. We need you.
Yes.
That's just my PSA for today. Okay, so let's talk about the paranormal part of your romance. What got you started on paranormal? You've always been a fan? Was there a moment? What happened there?
I've always been a fan. I'm a big fan. I have had some personal experiences. All my life, I've been, always had an easy connection with animals. They just, I understand them, but it's always intrigued me. I find it not only entertaining, but relaxing, when you read paranormal escape, that escapism that you find in that. But, I've had some personal experiences, so it's just it relates to me. It resonates with me. I think a lot of that also comes from the dance and the ballet. A lot of the classic ballets that I've not only had to dance, but I've also produced when I had the nonprofit company. There's a lot of fantasy aspects, and when you talk about Sleeping Beauty and Nutcracker, and all these classics, and so I like blending those classics into modern romance that also blend into some of that paranormal, because it talks about, destiny and true love and how you find true love, and I believe it exists. I believe true love exists. And so, that's part of my message, and part of what I want to convey and how I want to convey it comes through paranormal.
I love that. It's not a genre that I get into very often, only because I get really sucked in and then it kind of becomes reality, and then I'm like, I've got to find that split, and like that's just how my imagination works, and I'm just like, oh. And so like when I was a kid, like we would watch oh my goodness, anyway, there was a show and there was a paranormal, like kind of a undercurrent of paranormal, and I would have nightmares about these ghosts. Oh, it was Goosebumps. Why can't I remember that? Why, that was like the biggest thing ever. And they're not even that scary. Looking back, they're not that scary, but back then, like, it was all very real, and like I felt it, and I was those kids. But that's what I do when I read, is I become the characters in the book. Like, I find my place in the book, and I become the character in the book. And so paranormal has not really been my thing until I had a friend who he started writing supernatural paranormal stories, and I was like, okay, I'll read one. And I was like, okay, that's not so bad after all. But now you're talking like dragons and romance and Scotland and time travel, and I'm going, I could probably get into that. That sounds kind of cool.
Well, yeah. Actually, it's interesting. I do get asked, how do you blend your modern with your paranormal and your history? Because I do blend. It's a modern romance. They time travel. There's history involved in it. And there's paranormal. When I decided that I wanted to do this series, I decided that I wanted a location that was the base, that was going to be the home base kind of in the series, which is Dunstaffnage Castle, which is owned by the McDougall family. Actually, it's owned by the the Historic Environment of Scotland, but it was owned by the McDougalls, built and owned by them. And the Chapel in the Woods is a large private chapel. It's one of the largest private chapels built in Scotland. It was considered, in its heyday, probably one of the most luxurious, rivaling Iona Abbey. which is also extraordinarily beautiful. I've been to it. And the castle sits on the Western Isles of Scotland, outside of Oban, Scotland. I picked that location mostly because the chapel provided a lot of opportunities in the story for me. The history of the castle and the tumultuous history of the castle guides a lot of what the story is. That's the historical elements, because we time hop around the castle, but we also time hop into other places and other times that aren't in Scotland throughout the series. What's interesting is the Fae and how I incorporated the folklore of the Fae. The Fae are based upon some of Scotland's oldest folk tales, which are the Tuatha De Danann and the Four Fae, which are some of their childhood stories and were part of the folk stories that the Irish immigrants brought into Scotland. So these are, it's not something I made up. I'm certainly taking some liberties with the stories.
Yeah.
But, the paranormal aspects of this are guided by some history and some folklore of Scotland. And so that's kind of guided me through some of this paranormal as to how these stories came about, how these people lived, and what were the Fae like, and it's those classic stories guide that, and a lot of tropes that you find in some classic stories from the ballets that I've done appear in a lot of my stories.
That's kind of cool. And so you probably had to do your fair share of research to get all of this kind of lined up, because readers will call you on it if you get it wrong. If
You are
not
correct.
readers, your husband will, but readers definitely will.
You are correct. I had a critique partner that had been to Iona Abbey, and the second book they traveled to Iona Abbey in the grave site and in the graveyard by it, and there's a nunnery next to the abbey, and the grave site actually sits between it. And as I was writing it, at the time I was writing that second book, I had not visited Scotland yet. I visited Scotland a year ago. And at the time I was writing the second book, I had not been there, and I was writing based upon maps. And as I was writing, I was so focused on the storyline, I had flipped the abbey and the gravesite location as I was writing it. And so it's interesting because I had a critique partner that had been to Iona Abbey, and she's like, I don't think the courtyard's there. I think it's, so I had to go back. Because, I got so caught up, in the second book, Marie, who I mentioned earlier about the spiritual buildings and the mosaic floor, in the second book, she gets kidnapped by a priest who drags her to all these different old crosses, these Celtic crosses across Scotland, trying to find a magic stone. He's got it in his head that she can help him find this magic stone, because she did this mosaic floor, she possesses magical powers, and he can find the stone and rule the realms. And so he drags her across all these crosses. And so they go to across a large cross that's in front of Iona Abbey. And like I said, I put the graveyard in the wrong place. So I got caught. But fortunately, it was a critique partner and I could correct it. But, and since then, at the time that a year ago, at the time that I went there and had actually gone to Iona Abbey, that second book was in edits, and so if I'd really messed something up, I could fix
it. That's awesome, though. It worked out very nicely for you in that case.
Yes, it did.
Some of us got our advanced copies and realized that we changed the guy's hair color at the wrong time. We're like, oh, whoops, my bad. Yeah, it just grew back a different color. My bad.
Right.
It happens.
Right.
We got it fixed before it went out, but.
Yeah, I'm drafting book 7 right now, and so I've got this herd of cast, because each book is a different couple, and so and it ends in Scotland. It starts in Scotland, it ends in Scotland, but there's other places and times they travel. But I had to go back and look at people's favorite drinks, because a Fae is in a room, and he has to deliver bad news, and so he waves his hand, and and everyone's favorite drink appears in their hand. And so I just sit there going, no, wait, who drank Merlot? And wait, I know she likes Chardonnay, but he likes stout beer. And so I had to flip back, because it's book 7. And so, I had to flip back through 6 books. I was like, I know Bree's favorite is Chardonnay. Her husband drinks whiskey. Now, wait a minute, So it was, I had to, was it Merlot or Cab? I can't remember,
Oh, man.
So I had to go back. It was fun.
That is funny. Okay, well, speaking of writing 7 books in a series, we had kind of had this before we started our actual conversation. We were talking about writing in a series. What is
Mhm.
it you like about writing in a series, and why do you think that is so important for authors? Because I am of the mindset a series is a way to go, but not everybody agrees with me.
I don't know why you wouldn't want to write in a series, and I'll just start talking.
Yeah,
I'll just go.
let's go.
Um, it's a great question, and series. I can see why series would be very intimidating. For first point, I love reading series.
Me too.
You get invested in these people, you get
Hmm.
invested in these characters, you get invested in this environment, you get invested in this voice this writer has, the way that they tell stories. If it resonates with you, you crave more
Yeah.
as a reader. As a writer, it's so much easier. And I'm certain some writers are going, no, it's not. It is. And I'll go back to the same story I told earlier. You know, um, you create this environment, you create these characters, you create these sub characters, you create, and as you create each, because every character has their goal, motive, flaw, conflict, stake, all these components that make a great story, that make a great character. And so you have your inciting incident, you have the climax and their goal, and they have their realized goal and their unrealized goal. And and as you write a book and you focus on these main characters, and so you see them through their journey, you see them to their end. I write romance, so it's we all know that the genre always ends in happily ever after or happy for now. So where we're going. We know where we're going. We know where this is going to end. So and readers expect that, and if you don't deliver, they get mad.
Hmm.
And you got to remember that. But and why wouldn't I want my characters to have happily ever after? They should. And the nice thing, another fun thing, I'm mentally getting ahead of myself when my mouth is going blah, 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 blah.
I feel you. Been there, done that already.
We did that earlier, but you start creating this environment, you create these characters, and you create these world, and why wouldn't you want to tell the rest of the story?
Yeah.
You create a sub character, and they've got a goal, a motive, a flaw, and a conflict. Why wouldn't you want to tell their story? It's like, in book one, the story focuses on Brielle and Colin, but Colin's assistant is John. Why don't we want to know about John? Book one, John's dad went missing when he was 10. His mom died. Only Granny raises him. We want to know more about John. John sounds like a cool guy. So let's write it. So book two, let's write about John. And Brielle has this good friend that she met that's Marie. And so when Colin and Bree go back in time, John and Marie are stuck together. Well, of course they're going to fall in love. So what I love about book two, and it gave me this perfect opportunity for a perfect start of a book, because I started at happily ever after. Book two starts at happily ever after. He's asked her to marry him. The first scene is the morning after he's asked her to marry him. She gets kidnapped by a priest, and now he's got to go, got to chase her across the Western Isles, and he's got to chase her back to the 17th century to go find her, because the priest figures out the portals. And so he thinks that he's going to find a, magic rock back in the past. So now John's got to go chase across, why wouldn't you want to know these great stories? And I love it because I gave you happily ever after. I rip it apart. And now we got to find out, are they going to get back together again? During that story, we meet Colin's sister, Annis Lee. Annis Lee loves Vikings. She's a Scottish girl that's loved Viking warfare. She's tried to, battle her big brother. Why would you want to know about her? But you see where I'm going with all this. Yes. It's like you find all these secondary characters, and you've created this world that this readers become, a readers become invested in. Hell, the writers become invested in. Yes. I get invested in it. And it's like, now I've got this whole story. I've got this fae, and I've got all these cool things going on. It's like, why wouldn't you want to know about these people? Yeah. Why wouldn't you want to know more about these people? So it gives you opportunities for writing. And that's the fun thing about a series. It's like, well, I kind of hinted at this character, so I think this next book's going to be them.
Mm-hmm.
And even I've talked about the dragons. I wrote the first book, and an editor came back and said, why did the stones have to come to the humans? And I went, I don't know. Let me find out. I'll get back with you. Let me work on that. Yeah, good question. So I sat down and started thinking through this, and the Tuatha De Danann and the king, and so obviously the stones had to come to the humans for protection. So I came up with this concept of these shape-shifting dragons that were going to portray their evil father. And then they betrayed him and gave the stones back to the good fae, and they're fae themselves, and their dad's an evil fae. And it's like, there's all the components for a perfect story, that alone. And it's like, there you go, there's another series. I even sit and think about the Tuatha De Danann, and he's king. At the time that I start the first book, Dagda, he's king. He's got his wife. He's got 2 daughters, and the 2 daughters are assigned to help the humans. And so those are the fae that go and help Colin and John, and they're assigned to them, and they pop in and out whenever they want. And they never come when they're called for, because they're fairies. And they think, the fairies play with humans like we're little toys and games. And, you never make a bargain with the fae, because it could come out bad. It could come out good. Mm-hmm. But, so I've even thought about the fae, and why did the evil king, who's Balor, and Dagda, who's the good king, why are they at war? What happened before that? There's a whole nother story. There's a whole backstory as to what happened with them, and why the stones had to be hidden with the humans to begin with, and how that battle came about. And, there's a whole backstory there, and that can be a whole, so, if you've, as a writer, if you've taken the time to really flesh out your sub characters,
yes,
think of those sub characters. If you've really fleshed those out well, you've really represented them well, and you've written some really interesting people, why wouldn't you want to tell their stories too?
Yeah.
And that's where I think a good series comes from, is when you have this, where you have this environment that's great, good storytelling, you've got a great voice as a writer that people and readers relate to. Keep telling the story.
Yes, and I think that if you can get people invested in the characters, I'm a very character-driven writer. Like my stories always revolve around the characters. The story, it's there, but the characters are the people. Like, I want to see them grow and experience and fall in love and do all the things. And it's all about, becoming invested in the people. And I think even if I think to the series who they have one main character, right? And that main character experiences different things throughout the whole series, and they've got people that do come in, but they stay the main focal point. Either way, like, if I'm invested in that character, I'm perfectly happy to read that series about one character growing and learning and living life. And I also think that you're just never at a shortage, especially if you've invested in that character. You're never going to be at a shortage of things to write about. And that's I don't know, I can't imagine not writing in a series now. I wasn't going to. Like, the book that came out in February was only going to be a standalone, because I didn't know what else I was going to do with it. But then another set of characters went, "Hey, Jennifer, I got another story for you." And it just I was like, well, shoot, I kind of wrapped that one up very nicely, but we'll just continue on and see what happens.
Yeah. When I submitted, it's interesting, when I submitted book 4, which I just signed the contract for yesterday, which is Stone of Hope. Mm-hmm. It's Brielle's brother. And in the first book, we meet Brielle's brother through her talking about how as a child he locked her in a garden shed. And there was a thunderstorm that came in, and she was locked in the shed overnight in a thunderstorm, and her fear of storms. And so they're in Scotland, and she's with Colin, and they're in the study, and there's a storm. And so she's scared of storms. And so he comforts her. And so she tells the story about this brother who locked her in the shed. That's where this fear comes from. And, the backstory of that is, her mother died of cancer, and the father left, and, they grew apart when the mother suffered cancer. And so the brother buried himself in the Air Force. He's an Air Force specialist, and he buried himself in that. And, it's just kind of this itty bitty backstory flash that comes through one scene. And so when I sent, I've told my editor, hey, these are the books, and this is, here's this one's this one's that, but she doesn't really like to know them until she gets the full manuscript. So when I sent her the full manuscript of Stone of Hope that features Brielle's brother, the Air Force special ops pilot, she emailed me back. She goes, "I'm so excited. Dominique gets his own story," And the interesting thing is it doesn't take place in Scotland. There's a portal in a museum. The family's visiting him in Miami, Florida. There's a portal in a museum. It's in the Eye of Ra. And he ends up traveling to the 30s in Egypt and landing in a archaeological Egyptian dig. And his love interest is the lady that's in charge of the dig. And so that's Stone of Hope. And so it's kind of cool because it sort of comps to it comps to The Mummy, it comps to Night at the Museum, and then it comps to Escape from Witch Mountain, which I don't know if you know the movie. It's a
I
70s
do.
movie.
Yes, I do. God,
Because
that's cool.
he has, yeah. So it's I don't want to give too much away, but
Right.
it is a really cool, because the first three books are Scottish. It takes place in Scotland. It features Scottish people. This is the first book in the series that doesn't, and I think it's the only book in this series that doesn't have Scottish people as the main characters. And it's a really cool left turn because it's the midpoint of the series. There's 7 books in the series. It's the midpoint, and it is a really, I think, when you look at an overall arc of a series, it's really cool to take a left turn in the middle of that.
Yeah.
And go someplace really cool. And so I had, my editor, when I gave it to her, she goes, "Oh, you must have had so much fun writing this." And I was like, "Yes, I did."
You have no
Yes,
idea.
I did. I really did. So, but yeah, that's like I said, I just signed the contract yesterday. I hope it will be out in 2025. So
Whew. Which
I'm
is not that
excited.
far away because when you look at the calendar, it's like, how are we this far into June already? Like the year is half
No,
over.
no, I know. Yeah. And, for me personally, I've got a book coming out October 21st and then another one November 4th. That's like really close together.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to be
Whew.
really busy.
Isn't that the truth? Well, I'm glad we're getting to talk now.
Yeah.
So let's take a minute and I'm going to, if you are open to it, let's flip the script and I'm going to put you in charge of what we talk about.
Wow. So would I ask you a question or ask me a question?
Your choice. You can change the
Oh,
subject and say, I want to talk about this, or you can ask the questions. That is up to you. You're the host. It's no longer my show.
well, goodness. She puts the dancer on the spot and she suddenly gets,
Improv.
really. La, 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 la. No, just kidding.
Hey, we can totally. That's fine too.
Oh, that's funny. Now, the only reason I do that is I actually, in college, we had a dance troupe that did nothing but improv, and we performed improv.
Ooh.
So that is, it was, it was guided. It was like you're in this place,
You
and
get
you
like a
have this,
prompt.
and you move like that, so you had
Yeah.
prompts, and
I was on a traveling drama team in college. Like we did we did drama and theater and that kind of thing. And improv was my least favorite part. I cannot stand improv because to me, I get stuck in my own head sometimes. And I'm like, no, I need somebody to guide me. I need to know what's coming next. But I will say that I have learned over the last couple of years that if you are, in my case, a self published author and you are not sure how to interact with the public about your work, go take some improv classes. Because I tell you what, like just being able to on the fly just talk about yourself, your work, or, adapt to the environment, whatever, like improv classes. 100% because they come back real quick and I'm just like, oh, okay, so I didn't like them then, but they're very useful now.
right. Yeah. It makes me think, writing, I'm a huge plotter. I am a huge plotter. The triplets make me plan, they're 26 now, but when they were younger, everything was planned. Everything
Had
was,
to.
it was, you had to keep that schedule or else it was insanity. And I'm a huge plotter and, it's summary driven outlines. I do my developmental editing in the outline process because I do heavy summary. That really helps. And I still find myself, after the inciting incident, I'm going back and then I hit the climax and I'm going back and, so I developmentally edit as I write. But, it's interesting because I do have a muse. I have someone that takes over that is just like, I'll just be sitting there and I'll be typing it. It's like, it'll just hit me. And I'm like, and then he went over and he did this. And then they did this. And then they did, and it's, and I've had to cut those scenes, it's kind of pathetic because, it's like, you can't go that way. Let me steer you back. Not that way.
This is for me, I guess.
Yeah. But, what's cool though, is I've actually come back, now that I'm further in the series, you don't cut those, you snip them out and save them.
Yes.
And, I've come back and reused some of those and told them from a different point of view or from a different perspective or use the concept and use it in something else. I can't use specific examples because it spoils some of the books.
Right.
But, there was, I cut a scene from the first book that I loved. I loved the scene. It was between Brielle and Annis Lee, Colin's sister. And, it was very heartfelt. It was very personal. They were talking about Colin and it was, it was a tearjerker kind of a scene. And, that moment I didn't want to let go. And it wasn't a muse moment. It was a planned moment. And at the time that scene fell in the book, it was near the end. So it kind of dragged the book. And so I had to cut that scene because it didn't serve the overall story. And we weren't getting to the end and the end point soon enough. And so I had to cut that scene. And I just hated myself for that. And so I've actually reused it in book 7.
Oh,
and
that's always good.
But it's not between Brielle and Anna Slee.
Right.
But Brielle gets to have this conversation, and it's a heartfelt conversation where she talks about her husband, and the sentiments are all still there. It just got recycled in a different way. And so, that's been helpful. But yeah, that improv is a big thing. When I was studying acting, we had improv was a regular exercise. I mean, that is a tool because you find yourself, you never know when you're going to be in a scene and something, you got to improv to get out of something. Something's going to happen. But we had an exercise called the couch, and you went and sat on a couch with someone, and you were given one subject, and you had to have a conversation like you knew what was going on. And so it's interesting. But yeah, it is a tool that you need to use, especially if you're going to interact with the public.
Oh yeah.
But I remember, dancing improv is a little different. I remember in a workshop when I was in college, I went off to this workshop, and the director of was it American Ballet Theater? It was the American Ballet Theater 2, which is their secondary touring group, not the main one that performs in New York. But this is, ABT. This is a professional company in New York City. This is no Laughing Matter, international performing company. Now, of course, this was in the 80s, but this was the guy that directed the touring company that went on tour around the country. And he was teaching at this workshop. And so I was a dancer, and it was a choreographer's workshop, and I was just a dancer there. I wasn't a choreographer, but I was assigned to a choreographer. She hit choreographer's block. We had like 2 days, and she had to put together, 2 minutes of something. And so it was like a 3-week long workshop. And so every couple of days you'd get a new choreographer, they'd put together something, and we'd perform it and go in front of a panel. And so then they give feedback to these choreographers, and the dancers just got to be there for the experience of it. So she got choreographer's block. I got sick one day, and we had the 3 days to work together, and we'd only work together the first day. So we get to the third day, and we're performing that night, or we got to the fourth day or something, and we were performing that night. And she had probably 30 seconds for the beginning of her piece, and she had nothing else. She hit choreographer's block. She's like, I just can't figure it out. And so I said, why don't you read me some of your notes? Why don't you tell me what you want to do? And I told her, I said, I'll improv the end. I'll just improv. And so I improved a good, minute and a half, 2 minutes of this. And, I did it for her once or twice. And then we called it for the day, and I went and performed it, after dinner that night. We showed up, and it was an informal performance. It wasn't, it was just for the people for the workshop. But there were, 4 or 5 professionals that were there. This guy was, he was Richard England back in the 80s, ABT2. There was Jürgen Schneider, who had trained Baryshnikov. There was, there were a number of these are all old. They're all dead now. They're older people, but these were big dancers and big critique people, big mentors to be around. And so we didn't tell anyone that I was going to improv this. We didn't, we just did it. We performed it, and I was like, yeah, it was so cool, and it's so funny because, she talked about this rage and all this stuff. And so, I was not only a classically trained ballet dancer that could do point and all these classic things, but I did modern too. And so I got into this rage modern where I was banging on the floor, and I was, doing all this, very Martha Graham-esque sort of, angry dancing. And it turned out she waited until she got to the critique session to tell him, oh, by the way, she improv that, and they just, and I was told that Richard England, this director of ABT2, was so floored that the dancer could do this, and that the dancer could improv this and come off the top of her head with the stuff that, and he's so, he's the classical ballet, trainer. He's everything's practiced. Everything's, that they're doing the versions of classical ballets that have been around for 100 years. So, it's, to him, it was just foreign to this concept of improv. And it's interesting because there's a lot of how we deal with life and how we do life is improv.
Isn't that the truth?
You find, let me tell you something. 90% of my kids' upbringing was improv.
Winging it, baby. We just call it something different,
Oh yeah, I can't tell you how many mornings we'd wake up and they were toddlers. It was like, oh, this is what we're doing today.
This is it. Got it.
That's what today, today is going to be like. It's going to be a screaming day.
You see that schedule? We just going to throw that out.
Yeah. Schedule? What schedule?
What schedule?
Yeah, what's funny? No, it's just funny, because two of them still live at home. They're 26. They're still doing some college classes, and that's fine, but it's so funny because to this day, that schedule is still on the board. To this day, there is a menu every week. Every day there's a weekly menu, and that's the menu. And, it started when they were toddlers. It's like, what are we having for dinner? I don't know. Dog poo. Look on the board.
Right. Like it's
right. And so it's 26 years old. What are we having for dinner? Dog poo. Look at the board. It's on the board, and, the schedule's there, the menu's there. Hey, but yeah, so the answer is dog poo if they didn't look at the board.
Seriously. Like, honestly, that's the way it's probably always going to be. And even, they come home for Christmas after they do move out and be like, what's for dinner? Be like,
well, one of them's out. Yeah, we've launched one. I'm proud to say one has launched. One has
30%. Woo!
Oh yeah, I had neighbors, texting me, I see a moving truck. Are all of them out? It's like, oh yeah, I had neighbors out cheering. Yay! Let's go on. But yeah, I launched one, and I tell you what, the first thing he does is he makes a beeline to the fridge when he comes home.
Of course, because it's mom's fridge. Especially if they're coming home, because that's when my mom always puts the good stuff in the fridge when she knows we're coming to visit. I'm just like, yeah, we know where to go. Thanks.
Oh yeah, there was one time he went in there and got into something that I had planned for, like I had made ahead of time and planned for something, and I was like, I'm taking that to a party, and he's like,
the party's right here, Mom. I came to see you.
Right.
Hey, I think we did pretty good flipping the script there for a minute. I think that worked out just fine. So,
well, good.
Yeah, we just didn't need to call it flip the script. We just needed to go off script and improv. Like,
that's cool.
Go full circle. Okay, so tell all the listeners, if you will, and I will put it all in the show notes, but let the listeners hear how they can connect with you and your work.
Okay, so you can find me on my website. That's Margaret Izard, author. That's and Margaret is spelled MargaretIz as in zebra, ARD, author.com. You can catch me on my socials. It's Mizard Author. So that's MIZARD, author. And that's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is where you can always catch me. My books are available at most online major retailers, not only Amazon, but Barnes & Noble, Google Books, goodness, a number of them. You can also find my work at thewildrosepress.com, who is my publisher. And you can find all the links to all the major retailers through Wild Rose Press.
Perfect. And then I have one last final question, and it's the big question. And I don't ever expect anybody to get it wrong, so no pressure. But are you ready for your big question?
Sure.
All right. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want listeners to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
Goodness. I'm gonna, I have like 10 thoughts. I didn't draw a blank. It's like, which one?
All of them.
All of them. No. I'm in my 50s. And I love it when Martha Stewart sits there and goes, I didn't start my first company until I was 55. I didn't, that's when she started her first company, and she's doing wonderful. You can teach an old dog new tricks. I started writing in my 50s. I'm in my mid 50s. But I've, just, if you want to do it, just do it. Yeah. Just get up and do it. Lots of people sit there and go, I've always wanted to write a book. Well, then sit down and do it. You have to make time. And if you want to do, I want to say successful, but if you want to do really creative projects, if you really want to do something really cool like this, like write a book, write a series, sit down and do it. When I said, this is what I want to do, this is, it's time. I do it now or I don't do it at all. And I wanted to do it in my 30s and I didn't. I didn't have the maturity. I didn't have the I didn't have the talent. I think I didn't have the talent. I probably had the talent. I probably had the ability. I just didn't believe in myself.
Yeah.
Believe in yourself. Teach an old dog new tricks. You can do anything you want to at any time. When I finally decided I was going to do this, I sat my family down and said, I'm doing this and I'm going to take time to do it. And they all freaked out because I wasn't going to be mom on call. You know, I wasn't, you know, the mom on demand. And, you know, because I tutored my kids through college, through high school, through elementary school, high school, college. You know, I've quit working back when I closed the dance studio. I quit working, which was, you know, the kids I think were in third grade. You know, they're 26 now. That's a long time, you know. And I didn't work a job, but I worked. You know,
Right.
I was CEO of this household, and I'm you know, getting triplets through the public education school system is not an easy thing. And you know, but if you're going to do it, get up and do it. If it's a dream, just do it. Make that time and do it. You know, once it took 3 months, but yeah, my family got used to the fact that I'm not at their beck and call. And you know, nowadays, you know, at first it was really hard. You know, if they saw me at the computer, they thought they could interrupt me at any time. And nowadays they just kind of stand back and go, you know, so it's interesting, but you know, you know, it's never too late. You're not too old. You're not too young, and by all means, believe in yourself. Because if I can do this, anybody can do this. That sounds horrible, but
no, but it's such good advice, because if you don't believe in yourself, why would anybody else? You know, like
right.
It's got to start here deep inside. Otherwise, the passion's just not going to be there. Like,
right. You know, and you know, people, you know, I'm on book 7 now. I got 3 books of the other series already written. I've got the second Christmas book already drafted out of the 3 that I plan on writing. And I've got some type of companion book I'm going to do for the dragon books, you know. And once I decided to do this and I really got disciplined and I really focused, it just all came flowing out. You know, that's a lot of books in 5 years. And that's, you know, and especially I've written more of them in the last year that I've gotten a publisher. And it's like, you know, now I've got deadlines and I've got goals and I've got, you know, and once you hit that and you realize I can do this, this is possible and I am doing it, then that really gets your juices flowing and really builds your confidence. And so, you know, just take that first step and get started. I think that's the hardest, is taking that first step and just do it, you know, and the first, you know, for those of you that are writers out there, that first draft is going to suck.
Yeah, it is.
The second draft is going to suck.
Yeah,
you know, but you have to keep writing.
Yeah.
You have to keep writing to get better. So just keep doing it. Even if you're writing it and you're like, this really stinks. Put it down, go back and edit it, because you can always go back and fix it. Even after you've already printed it, you can go back and fix it. I can't, my publisher won't let me. You're self-published. You can go back and change your ebook file. I can't, you know, once I hit my galley proof, man, that's it. I'm done. You know, and you know, the contract is 10 years. So, you know, I'm done, you know, but you know, just do it. That's all I can say.
No, I'm with you. And you know, I love that you set those boundaries with your family, because it's so easy for those responsibilities to become excuses. And I'm not saying that family should not be a priority. It should absolutely be a priority. But if you have a dream and if you have a passion, you have to be willing to set those boundaries and say, you know what, my 3rd graders, they're not going to go do anything. I don't have to be with them 24/7. They can actually, you know, be responsible. Those 16-year-olds, you know, they're definitely a little more independent. You have to stop making the excuses that you can't do something because something else is more important, if that's what you really want to do. Otherwise, it's just going to be a hobby to you and you're not really going to take it seriously ever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Actually, you know, it's interesting because it's actually doing this and showing that there's a discipline in it. It's actually inspired my kids to take their own dreams and do their own things and chase their own things. Because they're like, well, you know, if mom can do it, I can do anything. Because, you know, I can do anything better than mom. they got that chip on their shoulder. Like, well, you know, mom's a dork. I can do anything. That's because my kids are 26. You know, they've got an attitude, and I love it because I gave them that attitude.
Right.
You know, I put that attitude there. That's true. It's not only did I train it, it's genetic. But the tree doesn't fall far. The limb doesn't fall far from the tree. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're like, mom's a dork and mom's stupid. If mom can do it, I can do it too. But yeah, so it has inspired them to chase some dreams. It's inspired them to be more aggressive and assertive in the things that they want to accomplish. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because it can go a different way. And I as a parent and as an adult, I don't think I would ever let that happen. I think the greatest success is, when you see your kids doing things that you're very proud of, or that you feel you've passed the torch. And I'll close it. I'll close that subject with this. My son number 2, the one that's launched, that's moved out. He has a degree in mechanical engineering, and so he works on cars. And you're like, but he's like a head mechanic in a dealership. And what I love, my husband and I have a great sense of humor. We've had a great outlook on life raising these triplets. And when I realized I put that stamp and that seal on, I've done my job raising this child. When I reached that moment was the time when he dressed up for Halloween and he went as the crash test dummy to work on cars. And I was like, I was like, I'm done. My parenting I have done my job.
Peak.
I have raised the perfect child. So yeah, every Halloween he dresses as the crash test dummy and goes to work and works on cars. Love it. And that's, yeah. So I'll close it at that. I've done a great job as a parent, and that's a proud moment.
I love that. No, you're doing such a great job in all aspects, it sounds like, and I'm so glad that I got to sit down and have this conversation with you. This was fun, and I'm really sad that the time is coming to a close, but at the same time, speaking of kids, I do have to get mine to drumline practice this afternoon. So with that, I want to just say thank you and congratulations on the new contract. You knew it was coming. I knew it was coming, but it's here, so yay. And her book just launched this last week, if you will, and it will be here. It's available on all the platforms, and so you can find it when you go to the show notes. Margaret, thank you again, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you. I hope you do too.
Thanks.